The problem isn't that people don't care. I rather think we are exhausted from caring, and at some point the emotional battery just runs dry. So we protect ourselves, we toughen up, we tell ourselves we're just being rational. But what we really lost isn't sensitivity, it's connection. Because once empathy fades, understanding disappears. And without understanding, trust will be impossible. I'll explain what I mean in this video. Why empathy is collapsing and how to rebuild it without losing yourself in the process. Empathy used to be a strength. Now it's treated like a weakness, or worse, an inconvenience. We used to say things like, put yourself in someone else's shoes. Today it's more like, get out of my way, I'm busy. Somewhere along the way, caring started to look inefficient, too slow, too emotional. And yet without it, everything starts breaking down. Teams stop collaborating, couples stop listening to each other, friendships fade into mostly small talk and emojis. But you see, the problem isn't that people don't care. I rather think we are exhausted from caring. We scroll through suffering, we read about disasters, we comfort our colleagues, our kids, our clients, and at some point the emotional battery just runs dry. So we protect ourselves, we toughen up, we tell ourselves we're just being rational. But what we really lost isn't sensitivity, it's connection. I don't think people have become evil. I think we've become overstimulated, emotionally drained, constantly trying to protect what little energy we have left. So instead of offering understanding, we ration it. We budget empathy like it's a scarce resource, which for many of us it has become, I guess. Everywhere you look, there's evidence of what psychologists call empathic fatigue. Nurses, teachers, managers, parents, they're all exhausted from caring. But here's the paradox. We still need empathy more than ever. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, the workplace is getting faster, the world is getting louder, and somewhere in between all the infinite notifications and misunderstandings, emotional glue that holds us together is coming undone. So only bad news then? Well, not at all actually. The good news is empathy isn't something you're born with or without. It's something you can build, and when you know how to do that, when you understand the behavioral mechanics behind it, you don't just become nicer, you also become far more effective. Next, most of us notice it first in small ways. You're in a meeting, someone interrupts you for the 7th time, and you think, does anyone even care about what I'm saying here? Or you send a message to a friend and they like it instead of replying, get this little heart in there. You share a problem and the other person jumps straight into problem-solving mode, utterly missing the point. None of these moments destroy relationships on their own, sure, but together, put them together, they erode them piece by piece, slowly, silently. Empathy, the ability to understand and share the feelings of another, used to be an assumed skill. Today it's an advanced one. Researchers at the University of Michigan analyzed data from 14,000 college students over 30 years. And what did they come up with? Well, empathy levels dropped by 40% since the 1980s. What? 40% down? That's not good. That's not a small decline. That's an emotional recession. And yet it makes sense. We're constantly overstimulated, overstressed, but under-rested. When your brain is flooded with stress hormones, empathy shuts down. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for compassion and perspective taking, literally goes offline. Who's got time for showing empathy in those situations? You can't feel for others when you're busy surviving yourself, right? So what do we do instead? Well, we outsource it. We like posts on social media about empathy. We retweet kindness quotes. We applaud speeches about compassion, but we don't necessarily live them, because that takes time, attention, energy, and patience, the exact things modern society not always contains, really. Next, now here's where it gets tricky. When empathy fades, cynicism grows. We start to assume the worst. Someone cuts us off in traffic. What an idiot. A colleague disagrees with me. Arrogance. A friend forgets to reply. So self-absorbed. We forget that other people's behavior might not be about us at all, actually. Maybe they're just overwhelmed, anxious, distracted, or hurt, or something else. But instead of curiosity, we offer judgment, because judgment is faster. And this is the real danger of empathy loss. Not that people become mean or evil, because I don't think that's the problem at all, but they become indifferent. And indifference is the emotional equivalent of silence in the relationship. It's not hostile, but it's cold. And coldness spreads. It becomes a culture. Offices where people stop checking in with each other. Families where everyone talks, but no one listens. Friendships that exist mostly in group chats. If you ever caught yourself thinking, why do I always have to be the understanding one? Well, congratulations. You are aware of the empathy deficit. You're feeling the imbalance firsthand, actually. This internal pain here isn't anger, it's disconnection. Disconnection is a profoundly lonely state, even when you are surrounded by people. Next, a bigger question. When did care become a liability? Somewhere along the line, I wonder if we actually confused empathy with weakness. We started treating kindness as naivety, patience as passivity, and emotional intelligence as some sort of soft optional luxury. But it's not. It's a survival skill. If we want teams that collaborate, families that function, societies that don't tear each other apart, we need empathy at the core, but not the fluffy kind, not the hug everyone and hope for the best kind of empathy. No, I'm talking about practical, useful empathy, the kind that can coexist with boundaries. Because empathy isn't about letting people walk all over you. It's about understanding where they're coming from, so you can choose how to respond, not to react, but to respond. And when you understand people, you don't have to like everything they do. Who does, by the way? But you can stop taking it personally, and that is freedom. Next, the truth is, empathy isn't about emotion. It's about attention. It's the act of saying, you matter enough for me to pause my own story and enter yours for a moment. And when that happens, when someone truly sees you, something in your nervous system relaxes, the walls go down, the defensiveness fades, and you can breathe again. And that's the real reason empathy is so powerful. It doesn't just connect people, it regulates them. It's how human beings create safety together. Imagine if every team, every couple, every classroom understood that. Imagine leaders who could read not just the numbers, but the people behind the numbers. Imagine families who know that silence doesn't mean disinterest and that logic doesn't mean lack of care. Different things. Next, most people think empathy means feeling what others are feeling. Many well-intentioned people have got this wrong. Step into their shoes, we're told, feel their pain. And so we try to feel their pain. We soak up other people's emotions like sponges, convinced that this is what good, caring humans do. We sit in their sadness, we echo their frustration, we match their tone and temperature because we think that's what connection looks like. You see, that's not empathy, that's emotional contagion rather. And there's a huge difference between the two. It's not the same thing at all. Emotional contagion happens automatically. It's hardwired. It's what happens when someone yawns. And you yawn too. Or when a colleague walks into a meeting with visible tension and the whole room just tightens. No one knows why, but the mirror neurons in your brain fire up completely, copying what we see and hear. This is biology, not benevolence. Empathy, on the other hand, is something higher. It's not about feeling the same emotion as someone else. It's about understanding the emotion they are having while still staying grounded in your own perspective. The problem is that when we confuse the two, we burn out. We take on so much other people's energy, we can't tell where their ends and our begins. Your friend is anxious, and suddenly you're anxious too. A colleague is very stressed, and now your chest tightens as if their deadline is your deadline. A partner is very angry, and before long, you are not comforting them. You're fighting back for some reason. That's not empathy. It's just messed up, actually. You see it in workplaces everywhere. Managers want to support their teams but end up drained by everyone's emotions. Nurses, teachers, coaches, parents, they all describe the same thing, really. Compassion, fatigue. They're not heartless. They're flooded. They're just flooded with emotions. They have confused empathy with emotional absorption. And when you live that way for long enough, the system collapses. You start protecting yourself by pulling back, shutting down, and eventually feeling less of everything, really. True empathy doesn't ask you to carry someone else's pain. It asks you to see it clearly enough that you can help them carry it themselves. The difference between jumping into the river to save someone from drowning and standing on solid ground to throw them a rope, right? If you jump in, you might both drown. But if you keep your footing, you can pull themselves to safety. That's why the most empathetic people aren't necessarily the most emotional ones. They are the ones who can stay steady in someone else's storm. They don't mirror panic with panic. They don't confuse understanding with agreement. No, they don't let their own state get hijacked by someone else's distress. They notice, they interpret, they connect, and that calm presence is what makes them safe to talk to. Most of us, however, were never taught how to do that. We learn that being nice means joining someone's feelings rather than understanding them. And when that approach starts hurting us, we assume empathy itself is the problem. But you see, empathy isn't the problem. It's the misunderstanding of empathy that wears people out. When you start to see the difference, a light goes on. You realize you can't be deeply caring without feeling constantly drained. You can be compassionate without being consumed by it. Real empathy doesn't require you to feel more, it requires you to see better. It's not about diving into someone else's emotions. It's about keeping your head above the surface so you can actually help them find their way back to shore. That's actually a great metaphor, don't you think? Next, in order to understand what empathy really means, you must separate emotion from interpretation. The human brain is fantastic in many, many ways. It's also a bit complicated. It's a storytelling machine. The moment we feel something, we start explaining it, usually without realizing it. Someone snaps at us, and our brain says, "They're rude." Someone forgets to call back, and our brain whispers, "They don't care about us." We don't just feel emotions, we interpret them instantly. Then we treat those interpretations as facts. This is where empathy so often breaks down, not in the feeling itself, but in the confusion between emotion and interpretation. We don't just read what others are feeling, we rewrite the story in our own language, so to speak, using our own fears and biases as translation tools, I would say. You probably experienced this yourself. You tell a close friend, "Oh, I'm feeling really stressed," and they respond with, "You are overreacting." Or you tell a colleague you're disappointed with them, and they say, "You shouldn't take it personally." Well, it was me who got a bucket of all over me. How can I not take it personally? You were hoping for understanding, but what you got was an interpretation. They didn't meet your feeling, they replaced it with their opinion of your feeling. That's not empathy either, that's commentary, I would say. Real empathy begins when you learn to pause between those two steps, between emotion and interpretation. When you can notice what you're feeling, or someone else is feeling for that matter, without immediately deciding what it means. It's the emotional equivalent of counting to 3 before responding. Let's try this. 1, 2, 3. This might sound simple, but it's not easy. The brain is built for shortcuts. Psychologists call them automatic appraisals. Lightning-fast judgments that helped our ancestors survive. The rustle in the grass might be the wind. It could also be a snake. Smarter to assume snake and just run. But in modern life, this reflex often works against us. We are usually not under some kind of lethal threat, okay? Usually. Someone's silence might mean they're ignoring you, but it could also mean they are thinking, pondering. Someone's cold tone might mean they are angry or simply super focused. When we skip the pause, we lose the nuance, you see. I once worked with this entrepreneur, very logical, very efficient man who struggled deeply with this. Whenever someone on his team expressed frustration or uncertainty, he heard it as criticism. His internal interpretation went straight from "they're emotional" to "they're attacking me." So he defended himself every single time. Got quite angry, frankly. And he couldn't understand why people stopped coming to him with problems. I asked him what he thought empathy meant. And he said, well, it's about being nice to people. That was his entire framework. But again, empathy isn't niceness, it's accuracy. It's the ability to read the emotional data correctly before you decide what to do about it. Think about that for a moment. If you can't separate what you observe from what you assume, you're not connecting with another person. You're connecting with your own projection of them. And that means you're talking to a mirror, not a human being. Not the same thing. And this confusion is at the heart of so many daily conflicts. A partner says, "Oh, I'm fine." But the tone sounds sharp. "I'm fine." So you assume they're angry. You react defensively. They get frustrated. And before long, you're fighting about the fight, not about the real problem. And all because neither of you stop to separate the emotion itself from the interpretation of it. That's why emotional intelligence always starts with emotional literacy. It is the discipline of noticing before narrating. Great communicators, truly empathetic people, aren't the ones who feel the most. They are the ones who notice the most. They observe tone, they observe body language, micro-expressions, pauses, without rushing to label anything or explain it. It's a skill anyone can learn, by the way. You can train your mind to spot that little window between something just happened and I know what it means. That gap is where empathy lives. Because empathy doesn't require you to fix it, to solve it, or to agree. It requires you to understand. And understanding demands precision. So the next time someone reacts in a way that confuses you, try this. Instead of asking, "Why are they doing this?" ask, "What might they be feeling right now?" And notice how that changes the tone inside your own mind. The first question invites judgment. The second invites curiosity. One shuts the door, the other opens it. When you start living that way, noticing before labeling, separating emotion from interpretation, you begin to see people more clearly than ever before. Conversations slow down, misunderstandings shrink, and conflicts soften into something that actually feels, well, solvable at least. In that space, empathy finally becomes what it was meant to be. Not a flood of feelings, but a clear lens through which you can see another person's world without losing sight of your own. Next, true empathy requires emotional balance. If empathy were only about feeling, it would be chaos. If it were only about thinking, it would be dull. Real empathy lives in the delicate space between the two, where compassion meets clarity, where heart and head hold hands instead of fighting for control. Most people lean too far to one side or the other. Some drown in other people's emotions until they can't tell whose pain belongs to whom. Is this your problem or is it mine? Does anyone know? Others retreat into logic, treating emotions like technical errors that need debugging. Both extremes are understandable. Feeling deeply makes you human. Thinking clearly keeps you focused. But emotional balance isn't about choosing one or the other. It's about, well, balance. It's about learning to stand with one foot in each world, connected yet composed. Think of a doctor in an emergency room. If she feels every patient's pain as if it were her own, she won't last a week. But if she feels nothing at all, she loses the very quality that makes her trustworthy. Her strength lies in balance. Enough feeling to care, enough distance to think. The same rule applies to parents, leaders, partners, anyone who deals with people, which is to say, everyone. I once worked with a sales director who prided herself on being a people's person. She felt everything. When her team was stressed, she couldn't sleep. When someone cried, she cried too. She thought that made her empathetic. And in a way, I guess it did. But it also made her quite ineffective. Her empathy had no boundaries, so every emotional wave knocked her over completely. Eventually she started shutting down to protect herself, which confused everyone even more. She went from too soft to being too hard, all because she never learned the balance. And emotional balance doesn't mean caring less, it means caring accurately. It's about regulating your own state so that someone else's doesn't hijack it. Neuroscience calls this co-regulation, when one nervous system calms another by being calm itself. Instead of absorbing another person's chaos, you just need to offer them your stability. That makes empathy powerful. It transmits safety, not sympathy. And in practical terms, the balance looks like this. You listen without taking sides. You acknowledge feelings without amplifying them. You say, I can see how frustrating this must feel, instead of, oh no, that's terrible, I would be furious too. The first opens space for reflection, the second just pours fuel on the fire. And here's the irony. The more balanced you are, the more trust you build. People sense when you're grounded. They sense that they can fall apart for a moment without you falling apart with them. Like in the drowning example just before. If you work from the beach, try to pull them out of the water. Or if you jump in and try to hug someone who is drowning, telling them this is really, really awful, that's not much of a help now, is it? And that's why the most calming person in any room isn't necessarily the one saying comforting words. It's the one whose tone, body and energy say, I'm here and I am steady. We rarely talk about this kind of balance because it sounds almost mechanical. People hear words like regulation, structure, framework and assume coldness, maybe even distance, as if caring must be spontaneous and raw and totally unfiltered. But it isn't cold, it's compassionate precision. That's what it is. Think of it as emotional posture. When your physical posture is off, shoulders hunched, spine twisted, even small weights feel unbearable. Or when you stand correctly, you can carry far more without strain. The same applies to empathy. When your emotional posture is balanced, someone else's pain doesn't crush you. Their stress doesn't become your stress. You can stand beside them instead of collapsing with them. And people sometimes mistake that calmness for detachment. You're not reacting. They say, don't you care at all about me? But that's exactly the point. You care enough not to react. You care enough to stay grounded so the other person has something steady to lean on. Emotional balance doesn't mean you're indifferent. It means you are reliable, and that's a good thing. In many ways, this kind of balance is what the world is starving for, I think. We have no shortage of people who feel. It can be seen literally everywhere. The shortage is of people who can contain feeling, who can present with emotion without amplifying it. In a storm, the loudest voice isn't the one shouting directions. It's the one calm enough to actually see the map. When you develop that inner structure, empathy becomes sustainable. You no longer dread difficult conversations because you know you can hold them without losing yourself. You stop taking other people's moods personally. You stop absorbing chaos. And that's when people begin to trust you. Not because you always agree with them, but because they sense you won't disappear emotionally halfway through the conversation. So no, balance isn't mechanical, it is mastery. It's what allows empathy to move from being an accident or personality maybe to being a skill you can rely on. And like posture, it takes awareness and practice. Once you have it, everything you carry feels lighter, including the people around you. Next, emotional balance is created by a clear behavioral framework. For most people, empathy feels a bit mysterious. Some people seem to have it, others don't. We describe it as a soft skill, as though it's something that belongs in the same category as intuition or luck. But the truth is, empathy follows certain patterns, and patterns can be understood. They can be practiced and therefore also refined. The reason so many people lose emotional balance isn't that they lack compassion. I would say it's that they lack a structure to hold it. Imagine trying to play the violin without ever learning scales. You might produce a few beautiful notes by accident, but most of the time it's going to sound like noise. Structure isn't the opposite of emotion. It's what allows emotion to express itself clearly. Every human interaction carries three moving parts: what someone feels, what they express, and how we interpret it. When you have no framework for these differences, you start reacting instead of responding. And someone's quietness feels like distance, their bluntness feels like an attack perhaps, their enthusiasm feels like chaos. You begin to take everything personally because you have no map for what you're seeing. That's where behavioral framework becomes priceless. It gives you the language for what otherwise feels like confusion. It helps you recognize that what looks like rudeness might actually be efficiency. What feels like indifference might actually just be calm. What seems like self-promotion might actually be enthusiasm. Without that framework, we live in emotional guesswork, constantly misreading each other. I remember working with a project manager some years ago. He was meticulous, highly analytical, thorough, as I would later recognize. To him, empathy meant precision. If someone shared a problem, his first instinct was to gather data, what happened, when, what variables were involved, and so on. He wasn't being cold, he was showing care in a language he trusted, being exact. But his team didn't see it that way at all. They wanted warmth, reassurance, visible concern, having a cup of coffee and speaking from the heart. To them, he looked detached, robotic even. Without a shared framework, both sides left the conversation misunderstood, slightly hurt actually. Once they learned the basic behavioral patterns, something clicked. The team realized he was caring just through logic rather than emotion. And he himself realized that showing empathy wasn't about changing who he was, but it was about translating his intent into something others could feel. That's the kind of clarity a framework provides. It turns invisible intentions into visible understanding. The same principle applies everywhere. Parents, partners, leaders, everyone benefits from structure. It doesn't limit empathy, it liberates it. When you know the behavioral map, you can navigate emotional territory without getting lost. You stop assuming malice when it's really stress. You stop confusing silence with distance or humor with disrespect. You start seeing patterns instead of problems. And that's the paradox most people miss. Empathy becomes reliable only when it's grounded in something predictable. It's not about feeling more, it's about decoding better. Structure creates balance the same way as rhythm creates music. Without rhythm, sound is chaos. Without a framework, empathy is just noise. So, if emotional balance depends on structure, then the real question becomes what kind of structure actually works. The Surrounded by Idiots method provides that framework. When people finally realize that empathy isn't an accident of personality, but a skill that can be trained, the next question always comes, so how do I learn this? That's the point where most communication theories actually collapse. They tell you to be more understanding, or to listen deeply, or actively, or put yourself in someone else's shoes. All nice advice, I guess, if you already know what kind of person you're dealing with, that is. But in real life, you don't. No, you're talking to a colleague who shuts down in the middle of a sentence, or a partner who argues through emotion while you argue through logic. The moment turns confusing again, and the theory disappears. That's why we need a framework that is both human and structured, something that honors emotion but still makes sense of it. And that is what the Surrounded by Idiots method does. It's a behavioral map of how different personality types express, interpret and receive emotion. It turns empathy from guesswork into literacy. This method is built around 4 primary behavioral patterns, 4 colors that describe how people communicate, how they decide things, and how they show care, as this is what we're talking about here. Now, let me show you something from my book, Surrounded by Idiots, real quickly. In the book I use a specific system to categorize different types of behaviors. It's a balance between extroversion and introversion, but also about task orientation versus people orientation. And then I use colors to make it easy to remember. Reds, yellows, greens and blues. And in short, reds are driven and direct. They think fast, they move fast, and they prefer action over discussion. If they care about you, they will try to solve your problems. Red empathy is action-oriented. They show care through solutions, not through words. If you mistake that for coldness, you'll push them away, when in fact they are trying to help. It sounds like, okay, you're struggling. What are we going to do about that? The yellows are expressive, social, full of ideas. Their empathy sounds like laughter and optimism. They will pull you out of sadness with energy and encouragement. Because yellow empathy is emotional and very expressive. They will hug you, they will laugh with you, cheer you up, and they feel with you, not just for you. But they might forget the details of your story about 5 minutes later. It doesn't make them shallow. It's just how they process emotion. Through energy, not analysis. No. Greens, well, they are calm, patient, reliable. They don't talk about empathy. They embody it. Their quiet presence says, you're safe here. Green empathy is quiet, it is steady. They listen, they stay, they don't interrupt. They give you presence, not advice. And because they rarely talk about their own pain, people often forget how deeply they can feel yours. Now, blues are precise and analytical. They show empathy through clarity, helping you to understand what happened and how to fix it. Logic, accuracy. Blue empathy is logical and it is structured. They will analyze your situation, find where things went wrong and then suggest better system. That is their version of caring. Might not look very warm, but it's pretty reliable, I would say. And when you understand these differences, empathy stops being a guessing game. You can see the caring behind the code. Okay, that was real quick. If this made you curious, you can of course pick up the book Surrounded by Idiots. It comes in close to 70 languages. Hopefully you'll find yours in there. Now, very few of us are only one color. Only 5% actually. We mostly use a mix, but even then, usually one color dominates. The value of knowing this isn't to label people, it's to translate them into something understandable. Once you know the language someone speaks, you can finally hear what they've been trying to tell you all along. And when you see those differences clearly, everything changes. What used to feel like rejection now looks like another dialect. What once felt personal becomes predictable. You stop asking, why are they like this? And start asking, how do they express care? And this is where emotional balance finally becomes possible. Because once you understand the behavioral rules behind empathy, you don't have to improvise every interaction. Now you have a system. You can adapt deliberately. You can choose the right response instead of reacting blindly. And that's why the Surrounded by Idiots method isn't just a personality tool, it's also an empathy engine. It gives structure to something most people treat as instinct. It teaches you how to translate emotion into behavior and behavior back into understanding. And the moment you start using it, you realize empathy isn't disappearing at all, it's just being mistranslated. When you learn to read the colors, connection becomes easier, faster, safer. Teams start functioning again, relationships soften, misunderstandings shrink, fade away. Because now, instead of drowning in feelings or defending against them, you're navigating them with a map that actually works. So, no, empathy doesn't need to be exhausting. It doesn't need to be risky or vague or one emotional core on your to-do list. When you have a reliable system, a common language, let's say, you can care intelligently. You can be warm without losing clarity, kind without losing strength, human without losing yourself. And that's the gift of a framework, I would say. That's the reason this method exists. And that's what makes empathy, well, sustainable again. If you found this useful, or maybe even very interesting, you can also check out a video I made about why I believe a system is useful for everybody when it comes to all kinds of communication, not just empathy. You can check out the link I put in the description. Thanks for watching.